Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third of our 6-event Marketing Science webinar series. Today's session is all about the features and functions of webinars and how you can utilize them to engage a scientific audience. Now, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by 3 of the fantastic webinar team at InsideScientific: Hayleigh Culliton, Sarah McFarlane, and Andy Henton. I'm Daniel Lazell from AZO Network, and I'm very pleased to be hosting today's events. Now, before we get started, just a few things about how you can get the most out of today's session. So firstly, we are recording today's webinar and we'll be making this available following today's event. We want you to take full advantage of this interactive session, so please send any questions, thoughts, comments to us via the private chat or the Q&A tabs at any time throughout today, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. We are going to be running a couple of Q&As throughout the session, so please do ask these questions when they come to mind. You can also look at the handouts tab where you'll find various resources, and we'll be running a number of audience polls during the webinar and a survey at the end. So please get involved and share your perspectives with us. During today's webinar, you can tweet any thoughts you have directly from within the platform using the hashtag Marketing Science, and we will have an exclusive webinar attendee special offer which we'll talk about more at the end. Finally, if you do have any tech issues, these are usually fixed by a quick refresh of the browser. However, if this doesn't work, just use the chat box to communicate with our team and we'll help to get you back up and running as quickly as possible. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sarah. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Danny. So I'm Sarah McFarlane. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I joined the InsideScientific events team last August, and I've been running webinars and virtual events ever since, but I've been running webinars for a long time before that. So thanks so much for being here today. We're excited to share some tips and tricks.
Yep, and my name's Andy Henton. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm the director and founder of InsideScientific. So I've been a web nerd for probably about 10 years now, producing hundreds of webinars. And I also have the pleasure of working with Hayleigh and Sarah every day, and also a few other fantastic staff here, where our main service is planning, strategizing webinars, summits, and virtual conferences for wonderful people just like you that are in the audience, with a focus on life science technologies. So thanks for being here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hayleigh. I've been on the events team at InsideScientific for almost 4 years now, creating some awesome scientific content, mostly webinars, but in the last year, I've gotten my feet wet with some larger virtual events, and I'm starting our podcast coming out very soon, so stay tuned. But I'm also the face behind our social accounts. So today we will be talking about webinar features and functions, yes. But throughout, we'll be calling out how you can optimize and humanize each one. And then we'll recap on the what's in it for you as a marketer. So to kick things off today, I'm going to launch our first poll. What do you find most challenging when planning webinars? Andy, Sarah, what do you guys think is going to be the most popular answer here?
Something I hear a lot is getting speakers to participate. So I think that's going to be up there for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. And content creation, I think. There seems to always be a bit of a challenge when it comes to pulling everything together and really kicking off the event if you can, creating a storyboard. Hayleigh, what do you think?
Mine was content ideas. That's what I've always thought.
Yeah.
It seems like I'm not too far off. I mean, our clients always struggle with having either too many ideas or not knowing where to put their ideas. So kind of glad to see that I'm winning this race.
Good for you.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So we're going to talk about 4 things today, and I will get us started with collecting market intelligence. So when planning a webinar, you need to be thinking about the type of information you want to get from your registrants and your attendees, and at what stage of the webinar planning process you want to collect that information. And always be thinking about the value of the content that you're offering and what it's worth to people. What should they trade to get that content? And in this case, it's usually information. So you can gather this information before the webinar using your registration form, during the webinar using polls, and after the webinar using a survey. So we'll get started with the registration form. So based on a 2020 survey, registration forms are most effective and most filled out if they have 5 to 7 fields after name and email. So keep them short. On our registration form, we asked you if you've ever been involved in a webinar, and if so, how many? And about 75% of you have been involved in at least one webinar, and many of you have done over 10, which is really great. We have lots of web nerds on with us today. The other question that we asked you was about features that you use regularly in your webinars. And the 2 most popular features mentioned were polls and surveys. So we took this data and we used it to inform the topics of conversation for today. And it allowed us to prepare information that's relevant and customized to you guys, which is really the most important part of doing these webinars. And we're encouraging you to do the same thing. Yes, these webinars are for lead generation, but your leads won't be very high quality if you're not giving your audience content that they want and content that they ultimately need to make a buying decision about your products. For example, we do a lot of case study webinars for our clients that are just about the science, and proportionally, we do way more of these than we do product-focused webinars. But we know from our clients and their experiences that the leads that they get from these science-focused webinars are just as good, if not better, than product-focused webinars. These science-focused webinars allow the potential customers, in this case scientists, to see the value that these products provide in a currency that's familiar to them, which is data. And that's basically what you're trying to achieve. These are educational tools as much as they are sales tools, and you can't have an informed buyer without providing that information. So let's move on to polls. 78% of companies that produce webinars do not use polls, and we think that this feature is severely underutilized. Polls should be used to gather the most crucial information from your audience because they've agreed to be on the webinar with you for about 60 minutes, and they will participate. So I took data from all of the 2021 webinars so far that we've done at InsideScientific and did some analysis on poll response rates and compared them to survey response rates. So 71% of live attendees respond to at least one poll question, while only 26% of those same live attendees fill out at least one question on the survey. So polls are a great way to get participation from your audience. It gives them something to click on. And we did one webinar where the speaker was presenting about the research involving fainting. And before he got into the science, we ran a poll to ask the audience how many of them had ever fainted before. And then we shared those results with the audience. This gave the speaker information about who he was presenting to, but it also changed the whole dynamic of the webinar because the audience felt included and they felt engaged. And he presented information that was ultimately relevant to them, especially the people that had fainted. So if the platform that you use to host your webinars has this feature to share your results, that's great. But if it doesn't, you can achieve this by verbally announcing those results as they come in to get that same effect. And lastly, we suggest that you limit the number of polls to 3 to 5 per 60-minute webinar. Nobody wants to feel like they're in a live pop quiz during their event. So if the speaker wants to include them in their presentation to get information about their audience, they should be encouraged to do so, but you should probably limit the number. And then last but not least, surveys. So in the same number crunch that I mentioned before about our 2021 webinars so far, only 26% of attendees answered at least one question in the post-webinar survey. And this is quite low compared to the reg form and the poll response rates. So keep this in mind when planning these questions. Many people won't answer them, but they still need to be made available. The survey is a great way to garner feedback from your audience, and the best way to get higher response rates is to mention that there is a survey early on in the webinar and show them how to find it. Mention it more than once, and people need to kind of be funneled toward that survey to get those higher response rates. Once they're at the survey, don't make it complicated or lengthy to fill out. 5 questions or less is ideal. No one wants to spend, 15 minutes after a 60-minute webinar filling out a form. And then another thing to consider when you're looking at your webinar platforms, something that we've discovered at InsideScientific is that survey response rates are much higher if the survey is integrated into the event and accessible during the event. So the platform that we're using today, Big Marker, only has the survey accessible afterwards. And so to kind of combat that, we're using polls instead to gather the information that we really want. But we're still encouraging you to fill out that survey at the end. So definitely give us your feedback on the event after it's over. the platform that we use for our clients is called Engage, and it actually has the survey available during the entire webinar. So it's mentioned at the beginning, and then they can access it throughout the entire event. And then it also pushes the audience after the event to that survey as well. So keep that in mind when you're looking at different platforms. And finally, as part of that same number crunch that I mentioned, I calculated the response rates for multiple choice questions versus text input questions. And the results are actually pretty staggering. Of the people who answered at least one question on the survey, multiple choice questions were answered 98% of the time, while only 32% of text input questions were answered. So moral of the story here, don't make people type essays for you. Keep the forms basic, simple, and quick to fill out, and you'll get better response rates. And ultimately, to humanize data collection, it's not really about how you collect the data, but it's actually what you do with it afterwards. So our advice is to think of ways to say thank you to your audience for their time and the information that they've provided that aren't typical. Show them that you care and show that what they have to say matters to you. So some of our clients, for example, like to ask attendees in polls or in the survey if they're users of the product or equipment being showcased in the webinar. And if so, one of the great ways to make people feel appreciated and seen, especially your users of your product, is to send them a little something. It can be as simple as an invitation to an exclusive LinkedIn users group that you can create for free, or it can be a little fancier and you can send them a little user care package or something like that. And if you tie that little care package with swag in it or merch to social media, which Hayleigh will cover a little bit later, you can ask them to make posts to show off their new swag. And it's really great for company image and for social promotion. And lastly, you can gamify your survey responses to allow people to be entered to win something in a draw, for example. So these are some really easy ways to humanize that data collection for people. And finally, what's in it for you as a marketer? Obviously, lead generation, but if you plan your questions properly, you'll be able to score your leads and prioritize them based on quality and relevance, which is really important for the follow-up process. And you'll produce better webinars. Your audience will keep coming back for more because they felt they got something out of the event that they couldn't just get off your website. And lastly, market intelligence. You'll gather information on what works, what doesn't work, who's paying attention to your content, who's listening, and you can target those groups moving forward in a long-term marketing plan. So that's ultimately the goal of humanizing and extending that experience for people. So now I will pass it over to Andy for the next section.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And yes, for this next session, I'm going to spend some time talking about using media effectively and the registrant journey. So I'd like to start with a discussion around media in general and how to plan to use different types of media effectively in your webinars. In science, engineering, and technology verticals, we all know there's an abundance of techno jargon and perhaps a comfort for presenters to deliver their message as a cluster of bullet points and text specs and even paragraph text. And this typically results in the presenter reading over their slides, which is both boring and anticipated, and therefore your audience tunes out or disengages. And while I do believe a certain amount of this style of content, like this technical content, is required, I would argue that it's overused, and this is something that should change in our industry. So presenters need to remember that you're telling a story, and media, whether that be images, GIFs, video clips, these are the tools that will get people watching and listening, connecting with you as a presenter, and better comprehending and retaining your message. So the first pro tip, I guess I would like to share is focused on planning your webinars to include captivating images, clear and concise charts and graphs, and most importantly, video clips. So to do this effectively, you first have to consider the technical capabilities of your webinar platform. For example, in the platform we're using today, slides must be uploaded as PDFs, which means any transitions, motion graphics, videos that are embedded in, say, your PowerPoint or Keynote file, these are going to be lost. On the other hand, our enterprise level broadcasting program that we use pretty much for all client projects, this does have the capability to read transitions, animations, play embedded video files. there's things that everyone's familiar with, I would say, in our industry from PowerPoint. And so ensure you know your technology and how it handles these media assets, before you move on to step 2, which is storyboarding your presentation. Okay, so now let's talk about video specifically and its importance during a webinar. So in terms of technology, I would say that almost all webinar platforms now have a solution for uploading and or streaming video. And as such, this should absolutely be part of your presentation storyboard. But really, the important point to consider is that in general, video has not been the traditional choice for scientific publishers. Educational content, particularly lab methodology, has historically been limited to written words supported by a few relevant photos now found in peer-reviewed journals or methods publications. But this is changing. So digital publishers like the Journal of Visualized Experiments, this is a great example of this movement. And it's no surprise that this journal was created by scientists about 10 years ago now, out of frustration that they were unable to complete crucial experiments based on the instructions provided in text articles alone. So simply put, it's my belief that technology professionals are thirsty for educational video content that will help them succeed, using the tools you market, sell, and support. Okay, so however, so while we were doing some research as part of preparing for this talk, and just even reviewing our own experience over years of producing webinars, we still see, for some odd reason, that there's a hesitation or challenge to get started with video. The 2020 On24 benchmark report stated that almost 60% of those that choose not to include video as part of their webinars attribute this to a lack of budget or skill. And let's just face it, this just doesn't make sense. Creating engaging media, it doesn't need to be hard. And in 2021, this definitely applies to video. Smartphones, light stands purchased from Amazon, gimbals, all these are accessible and affordable. And this is often all you need to create effective media as part of your webinar. So this, this low tech, I guess I'd call it, video creation approach has been used by our webinar team and our clients to produce fantastic product tutorials or walkthroughs, how-to videos, and even bring in other faces to the webinar that don't need to play a live presenter role, or perhaps they just simply need to be in 2 places at once. So it's a better use of getting them involved in the delivery, right? And so consider the tech you need. Don't be stopped based on budget or the skills you feel you have in-house. This is all achievable in today's day. But another quick point is that we have to consider the software programs that will likely come into play here for editing media. A little tip of the hat here, we've enjoyed using Canva quite a lot over the past year at InsideScientific for a number of creative jobs. Not really video editing per se, but maybe making short video clips and animations for social media, so more on the promotional side of webinars. And naturally, there probably will be some video editing software that you'll have to look at. Again, here we use a product called HitFilm. And I would say, Hayleigh, Sarah, we've all become comfortable with that program, right? Okay, so on the subject of video, let's shift to an example of an animated video that was shared during a virtual conference that we hosted in partnership with the Academy of Surgical Research. So in this example, our keynote, one of our keynotes, Mark Oria, he shared this video that explains 2 approaches his group uses during fetal surgery. So let's have a look.
Surgery. I'm going to show very quick this cartoonish showing what we are doing. This is the open fetal surgery. This is performed between 20 and 26 weeks. We have the babies with the spina bifida, and as the mom's trying incision on the abdomen, we expose the womb. And then it's open. We expose the lesion of the back of the baby. We resect the defect, and then we untether basically the cord. We expose, and then we close by layers. We can be closed by layers, but we can do the pump, like the mom's line, mom's trial, suture by layers, and close the back and close the uterus.
I'll just pause Mark there as he goes on to talk about a second option for a patch application. But again, what's clear from this example is that methodology and procedure is much easier to understand when presented as a video, and when using video as a presenter, you typically create an opportunity for people to lean in, watch, and listen, right? So now just a few quick comments on media and humanizing your webinar experience. First, I'd say the most important thing to remember is to turn on your webcam. The webinar itself is live video production. And when people can see the presenters and read their body language, see a smiling face, there's naturally a human touch and higher engagement. Next, when using captivating media, consider bringing in your audience to the experience and conversation. So for example, review a workflow or a chart and then stop for questions and clarification. Watch a video clip like we just did seconds ago, and then pivot to discussion immediately around what everyone watched and answer questions, right? And of course, think about producing video for use during your webinar that brings in other colleagues and customers, right? Bringing in these faces online presents an opportunity for inclusion and community. And finally, as we consider the extra effort required to create engaging media as part of our presentations, I'll end this section with a quick note on the value of these efforts provide. One important point is to remember that the schematics, charts, and videos you likely want to create for a webinar will certainly be used elsewhere. And if you don't have these media assets already, you likely should. Second, I think we would all agree that video leads to the best comprehension and retention of more complex subjects. And this is very important for scientific audiences, especially when you're trying to ensure your target audience understands procedures, methods, best practices, and ultimately the value proposition of your product, your lab instrumentation for most cases with our clients. And then finally, overall impact. We've heard it 1,000 times by now, but video continues to be the top performer online in terms of engagement, and it works the same in webinars. Therefore, definitely should be a part of your presentation strategy and a feature or function that you review when shopping webinar platforms. Okay, so with that, let's run another poll, and then we're going to move to answering some audience questions. All right, so how many calls to action do you use in a typical webinar? You got 3 options there on your screen, fewer than 1, or 1 or fewer. I guess that's how we intend that to be answered. 2 to 5 or more than 5. So let's see how this stacks up.
Great, Andy. Just as those are coming in, we've had some really good questions so far. I think we can tackle a few of those now. We've had one just saying that they use Zoom as their webinar platform and it's very limiting for playing videos. So that's a good one to know. You guys use much of Zoom, or are you mainly using it for, I know I only use it to talk to my grandparents during lockdown, but I don't know about you guys if you've used Zoom much at all.
No, we do not have any experience really as a webinar production firm using Zoom. In the early days, we did use GoToWebinar, which I would say at the time was very comparable. I mean, the company launched using GoToWebinar, but for the type of work we provide, it tends to just be missing some features and flexibility that the term I use, or we would use, is like broadcast or enterprise level broadcast software. And this is where the option to bring in high resolution videos and ensure that they play out clearly to all your members of the audience, to pivot from a talking heads layout for webcam to different scenes, if you will. I mean, these are the type of more advanced features that were available in enterprise broadcast software. So that's what our clients wanted years ago. So we've really kind of ingrained our service using those platforms. But as I say that, it doesn't mean that Zoom, GoToWebinar, Webinar Jam, what we're on right now is BigMarker. We use Engage, we use On24, we've used Workcast. They're all quality products. It's that they have different strengths, and you have to plan with the end in mind. So you have to think, what do we want in our webinars, and then decide what the right technology is that kind of aligns with those objectives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just had a question about the software that we're using today, and I think you just answered that. So it is BigMarker.
BigMarker.
And another question from Selena asking why we're using BigMarker today, and you use a different software for your clients. Andy, that's probably another one directed at you.
Yeah, so great question. So I think the easiest way to answer this is, again, so Engage, which we use which is driven through the Intrado network, by the way. If anyone's familiar with Intrado, they've been around for a while in the virtual conference space. It's intended to give access to those broadcast tools, right? Streaming high-res media effectively to an audience, accommodating large audiences, right? Thousands or more, creating immersive environments. And we have a section on that later, so you'll understand what I mean when you see a video that we share. So fully branded environments. And again, this aligns more so with our client requests. So it's just a better platform to address the variety of requests that we get from a client. Now, why we're using this today is for our own needs, what we like doing at InsideScientific and AZO Network, right? We like working with a platform that allows us to pivot and interact with the audience a little bit more. So Sarah, can you flip us to a foreheads for a second?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that type of example just there, at a click of a button, being able to move off slides to foreheads to present more of a panel style webinar where we're chatting with our audience. Previously, you just saw us pivot to a video quickly, and you also saw me mute the video and then move off of it. That's a really good example of features that it's really hard to think of how you'd use it when you're shopping for webinars. But we did a lot of review of platforms before we kind of chose BigMarker for our internal use case. But again, it's driven by the flexibility to move from slides to video, screen share, talking heads, and try to create the most engaging and dynamic experience for our audience. And as I say that, I'm hoping you're all enjoying the webinar so far and you're seeing that as an effective style. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. And just another one, I think you might have answered this already, but the software used for producing videos, Hayleigh, maybe we can come to you. I know AZO, we use Adobe Premiere Pro, we've used Canva previously, but there's loads of different softwares out there now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I go a little bit off the status quo for the rest of our team. I'm a Mac user, so and I'm the only one. So I usually stick to kind of the Apple suite. So I use iMovie a lot, but we have gotten into using HitFilm. And then we've used Audacity for audio mixing too. Yeah. But yeah, Sarah, what do you use? Or do you know what Liam uses too?
I've used HitFilm, but I also use OBS Studio for like screen capture and stuff like that. And I think, Andy, you used HitFilm to capture the video that we're going to show later, right?
No, actually, so I would use HitFilm for editing. And again, that's a lower cost kind of competitor on like an Adobe level suite of tools. I also think it's also it's not open source, but it has that like user network around it where people are really sharing how to get started with it. So as a team that's primarily self-taught, like that was a really good fit for our group. So again, it's HitFilm. But just while we're talking about software and tech and things to invest in, what I've used for a capture that I'll share later in this webinar, but we've also used extensively for other projects, is something called Vidyard. And what I like about Vidyard is that it allows you to record your screen, but also capture your webcam as like a picture-in-picture in a nice little round circle. And so you can create some nice engaging clips very easily and edit them right within Vidyard. Works great for marketing, works really good for sales as well.
Yeah, and I know a lot of our sales team are using Vidyard to reach out to either prospects or to new clients, and they found it really has a positive impact. But I think the sort of key takeaway is that there is a software, regardless of budgets, available and skill levels as well. So there's plenty of platforms that provide templates that you can use to put together nice looking videos that are on brand pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We've had, this is a good one. We'll come to this one next. Sarah, I think you might be best placed to answer this. Are polls suitable when doing simulated live webinars, as the audience might not be able to see the results depending on what platform you're using?
Definitely. So in simulated live webinars, at least the way that we like to do them, if we are going to do a sim live, we do actually like to pivot to a live Q&A. So there are certain poll questions that you will want to share the answers with your audience, and then there are certain ones that you don't want to. So during a sim live event, at the beginning, when it is simulated and it is recorded, we tend to use the polls that we don't want to share the results. And then at the end, when we pivot to live, the pivot point, actually, I'm giving away a secret, is our poll section right before the Q&A. So at the end of the recording, the presenters finish their presentation and we actually pivot to a live poll. And when you do pivot to a live poll, you can use those result slides. So that's one little hack for that. But even if you can't share the results, something that is humanizing about using a poll in a sim live is that you can mention why that information might be important. So you're like, we're gathering this information about our audience because we're interested in learning more about you in this way or that way, however you choose to phrase it. You don't necessarily have to share the results to share why that poll is being asked. And so that's another way to kind of like pivot around that, not being able to share the results. At least share some of the reason why you're asking them this information and why it's important.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too, during that polling break, if you know that it's pre-recorded, you can use that kind of break point where there might be some kind of dead air or blank silence to call out to other CTAs in your environment, which we often use. We do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert on something I'll bring up later again, but this really also comes down to platform features. So, and we've learned the hard way here at InsideScientific in assuming that the way polls are set up in the back end of your system and then implemented in live versus sim live versus right to direct on demand are all the same. And if you're shopping webinars, ask the platform how, don't just say, do polls work or something like that, and can you share results? Say, in each instance, running a live webinar, running a sim live, and then direct on demand, how do polls work? How does sharing the results work? Because it's likely that there's some variation. Again, maybe a tip of the hat to our current platform, Engage. We love the way it handles polls because it's the same in all three circumstances. I'll explain that later.
Yeah, I think just on that, Andy, there's been a couple of questions about sort of feelings towards sim live or 100% pre-recorded webinars. What do you think? Good thing, bad thing? Depends on the event?
Yeah, depends on the objectives. Not a good or bad type of thing. It's what plan with the end in mind. So, and also what are we working with, right? So if people aren't available on the day that you want to stream the live event, or if they're in a different time zone, sim live makes a lot of sense, right? They don't need to be up at 2 a.m. presenting live. There's also a movement, especially I think it's driven through the pandemic, because there's so many webinars. People are realizing that they can't even say, like, while I could be available, I'd like to pre-record it. And then while I'm on my own live webinar, I want to be chatting with the audience. So there's rationale to say this is recorded, folks. That's fine. Andy is here, but he's almost like doubling himself, right? You're talking and then I'm chatting, and it's like, how are you doing that? Well, guess what? It's recorded, but we let you know. So again, I think just really this comes down to what are we trying to achieve and what do we want to get out of the webinar? What are your KPIs, if you will? And if engaging your audience and asking tons of questions as they fly in as a presenter is one of them, it's like perhaps consider just pre-recording your whole delivery and being upfront about it. But great question. Yeah. Both are great.
All right.
Perfect. We'll just do one more question, but before we get to that, just a quick reminder to keep sending in all your questions. We'll try and get to them again in the second Q&A after today's presentation, and also to draw your attention towards the handout section. There's lots of great resources in there, so please do take a look in that. So yeah, the last question before we carry on is there an ideal length of webinar?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, there you go, Sarah.
45 to 60 minutes. If you're going to go over 60 minutes, it better be a riveting Q&A. So that
Quite
should
like today's Q&A, I'd say.
Yeah.
Right.
It should include the Q&A. So don't deliver a 60-minute lecture and then expect people to stay on after to participate in a Q&A. We like to do kind of 50-minute max by the time we get to the Q&A. And even a longer Q&A is better. So we always suggest, a 40-minute lecture kind of would be the ideal.
And kind of a nice to do is allowing just a little bit of time at the end of your webinar to allow people to complete your survey. That might drive higher engagement on your survey. Asking people, like you said, Sarah, asking people to fill out more information after they've already sat for 60 minutes. I know the commute time isn't as long anymore between meetings, but people still have places to go and other places and things that they want to do. So being respectful of time, I think, is key.
Huge point there. We book meetings on the hour. So if you're planning a 45-minute webinar, that you're probably winning in that perspective already. But if you're planning a 60-minute webinar, which is very common in our technology space, because you need some time to get into the weeds on technical subjects, and that's fine. That's why people are interested and they show up. And actually, our viewer percentage rate at Inside Scientific for years running is like 95% of the webinar. Every single one done is 60 minutes. But echoing what Sarah and Hayleigh have pointed out is only take the time you need, be succinct as possible you can, plan a good amount of time for Q&A because that's what people show up for. And then if you can, give them 5 minutes of extra time even after answering the survey. Give them back 5 minutes to get to the next thing of the day. Hopefully we can achieve that today for you guys. But yeah, really good points and great question.
Yeah. With that in mind, Andy, I'll hand back over to you and you can carry on.
You bet. Okay, back to the slides. Look at that, everybody. So this next section, I'd like to take a few minutes talking about features, functions, and strategies that apply to the lead up to your live webinar, and then also after the event is over. Now, we can't cover everything in the time we have today, but I've selected 3 things of particular interest, and those are going to be how to leverage emails in confirmation pages for additional engagement, how to utilize the 10 or 15 minutes or so you have before your live webinar begins, and most importantly, considerations and strategies for on-demand webinar access. So first, let's talk about confirmation pages and emails. These are both features and functions that will likely be included in any webinar platform that's competing for market share today. However, I would bet that most organizations do not use these tools to their full potential. So many webinar platforms allow you to fully customize your confirmation emails so that they not only reflect your brand, but also can include links or attachments to the next thing you want your registrant to experience. And the same is true for confirmation landing pages. Great examples that come to mind are leading webinar registrants to past webinars of similar subject, or other content pieces like blogs and podcasts. The image on your screen showcases how we achieve this at Inside Scientific, and that's by directing all registrants to a custom landing page that showcases all other published content that our client has on our site. Okay, so another key opportunity to drive more engagement as part of your webinar is during, again, those few minutes before we officially kick off the webinar. So this emerging feature is often referred to as a waiting room, and usually allows the upload of custom media, either slides, video, or a combination of the two. For those that arrived early today, thank you. And you would have been greeted, as you know, by a rolling set of slides that just provided some background about Sarah, Hayleigh, and myself, and information about our digital egg game. And I hope everyone's paying attention. So every minute touch point or opportunity to connect and engage with your registrant has value. And if you're shopping webinar platforms, I would look at this feature in the spec list to consider how your team might use it to provide extra value. And coming to the third point, but really the most important topic that ties to the registrant journey is how a registrant will access the webinar content and resources after your live session is over. This is such an important part of effective webinar planning and overall strategy, because somewhere around 60% of your registrants will likely not attend the live event. Don't get upset about this. This is the nature of live webinars. This is right on point. But it does mean that the on-demand archiving of your content and the means of data collection and interaction and engagement, like all that value you're trying to drive as part of your webinar production, it represents tremendous value to you. So you can't just think the webinar happens and then we move on. So in an ideal situation, most, if not all, of the engagement tools available during a live webinar should be available in the on-demand experience. But obviously, not all webinar platforms are made equal when it comes to on-demand archiving. So as we feel this is very important part of, or definitely is a very important part of our service to our clients, we decided to create a quick tutorial of how we handle this at InsideScientific. So let's watch that now together. Okay, so here's a quick little tutorial as to how we handle on-demand webinar archiving here at InsideScientific. So on our platform of choice for projects with clients, we are using a program that after the webinar is done is actually the same environment. It's the same webinar auditorium that is used for the live event. So the registrant comes to the login page, uses their email address to enter. As they move into the environment, the first great feature I want to point out is that it allows that viewer to pick up where they left off. This is fantastic. So I'm going to hit resume. Okay. And now that we're in the environment, and I'll just walk you through a few other things. First, that comes to mind, polls. We've talked about the importance of collecting data. And in this case, polls run within this window here, the same as they would have in the live webinar. And also, if we elect to share the results of polls, the results will share, but the data will update. This is very unique to this platform, something that we think is very cool. So your poll results, if you're sharing them with viewers, are not a snapshot in time. The next feature I'll point out is resources. Having access to those resources to supplement the webinar information are very valuable. And when you're reviewing this type of feature, if it is accessible on a platform that you're looking at, make sure that as you engage resources, they do open in new tabs to ensure they're not taking people away from the webinar itself. All right, and moving on to ask a question. What we like about this is we have the flexibility to change how the submissions are handled. And simply put, what we do in this case is we redirect all questions that come in on demand via email. So these emails would go to the presenters and the hosts of the webinar. So you can have a direct line of communication with your viewer. I think the final thing I'll just point out here is also, again, the importance on data collection we've stressed today. At the end of this webinar, a viewer would be triggered to complete the survey or be pushed to a redirect of choice, whether that be a client's website or another destination. But the survey is also accessible right within the environment. So pretty much this particular platform offers all the means of engagement and data collection that are available in a live webinar. And we think that this is an example of the most comprehensive way and strategic way to handle your on-demand archiving. Okay, everyone, thanks for listening to Andy there in that tutorial. I hope that you found the video helpful in summarizing some of the key features to consider around on-demand archiving. And now quickly to summarize this section, we must remember that a webinar represents weeks, possibly months of hard work, right? But also a journey with many touch points that you can leverage and personalize. So leverage the user journey and the features provided by your webinar platform to generate more meaningful touch points and with your registrants, including strategic calls to action, helping move them through your marketing, content, and sales funnels more effectively, and of course, collecting lots of actionable insights along the way. And actually, just as I say that, Michael, thanks for the question about how you suggest dropping a seamless CTA during a webinar, and I'm hoping we'll answer your question by just doing it in a few minutes. So anyways, with that.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. With that, thanks for your attention, everybody. And now it's my pleasure to pass on to Hayleigh for our final section on third-party tools.
Thanks, Andy. Right. Now, integration of third-party tools. So it is such a broad topic, and there are so many that it can be really overwhelming, and it's hard to decide what you should or even want to invest in. So today we're just going to touch on a few to get you thinking about how you can extend engagement to new platforms before, during, and after your webinar. So first up, a calendar management or a meeting booking automation tool. At InsideScientific, we use Calendly a lot, and we encourage our clients to take advantage of a tool like this too. It can be a great CTA during a live webinar and during post-webinar actions, and you can make it personal, or you can make one for a team or a group of people, like sales or marketing, for instance. This allows the person booking your meeting to see available times on your calendar, and even in their local time zone. So it takes all of that back and forth out of trying to coordinate a time and streamlines the entire process. But most importantly, it puts that request in the hands of your customers and clients, rather than leaving your sales team in the driver's seat to make cold calls and emails. Saying that, to truly optimize a tool like this, it's critical that you take advantage of custom questions. Asking the person booking a meeting for as many details as you can will help guide this meeting. These examples highlight that difference. So the form on the left leaves so much potential information to be discovered in that 30-minute meeting, where the form on the right, the individual booking the meeting will be providing at least the high-level information that you need to prepare for the meeting. So much like we always say to our clients about webinar planning in general, think about this with the end in mind. When you take the opportunity to truly think about the market intelligence that you're collecting through the process, you can use that information to personalize and humanize that meeting, that follow-up approach, that engagement with your customers and clients. On that note, if anyone is interested in booking a meeting with InsideScientific or the AZO marketing team to discuss webinars, summits, series, virtual events, interviews, podcasts, greater strategy, you name it, we've got you covered. Feel free to head over to the handouts panel and book a meeting directly on Andy's calendar to connect with a member of our team. And now, on to social media. So based on the AZO Network State of Scientific Marketing Report, we know that the great majority of you are already using social media marketing, both paid and organic, with relative ease. Only about 20% of the respondents to this survey said that they experience any challenges with social media marketing. But is there room for improvement? And how can you truly take advantage of this relatively cost-effective tool? So there are certainly some very obvious reasons and examples for using social media marketing on this slide. So first and foremost, before the event, to drive awareness and registration for your event. During your event, you can gamify your webinars by inviting viewers to engage and participate to win a prize. Hint, hint. Some platforms like the one that we're in today, Big Marker, allow you to integrate a hashtag feed. So if you take a look at your chat panel now, you'll see the hashtag marketing science. You can tweet directly from within this webinar room and engage your audience in 2 places at once. This can create a sense of FOMO for the people who are missing out live, but it also allows them to interact and join this conversation from a different platform, and it encourages attendee networking. After your webinar, you can use social media to drive awareness to any on-demand content. As Andy mentioned, you likely have about 60% of your overall registrants to re-engage at this point, and what a better platform to do that. You can also create private networking groups for attendees to join and interact and network with each other. Going the next step, something that's becoming more popular as digital platforms are evolving is live streaming. We don't have a great deal of experience with this at Inside Scientific, since most of our clients are looking for a gated experience on a private platform due to either the sensitive nature or proprietary nature of the content that's being shared. So they're looking for a little bit more exclusivity. But depending on your objectives or the type of webinar that you're producing, this option could be favorable if you're looking to engage a wider audience through a different or more casual and accessible platform. So really thinking about, where do you want that conversation to be happening? Live streaming can be useful for engaging a primary or a secondary audience and creates a social network around your event. This can also play into your greater marketing strategy too. So all of this boils down to customization, tailoring the tool to your use case to get the most out of it. Particularly with social media, being present and engaging, social networks are just that. They're online environments to be social and to network, and they're not intended to be one-way conversations. So connecting with your clients and prospects, resharing their posts and celebrating their work, these mini moments can have a huge impact on creating a sense of community around your brand. And lastly, we've touched on this quite a bit, but offering giveaways, contests, and special offers on your platforms to your followers can be an impactful way of humanizing a digital platform or tool. So now, what's in it for you as a marketer? Lead generation, of course. Engaging prospects and leads is why we do everything that we do as marketers. More interactions and touch points with leads and customers is important to staying relevant, but the message doesn't always have to be about buying. Being active on social platforms means sharing different types of valuable content: white papers, customer publications, FAQs, interviews, blogs, podcasts, you name it. The more you post, the more people will see your name, and connecting with your audience in a more personal and casual way allows you to better understand them. But what I feel is the biggest reason for using these tools effectively is to continue a two-way dialogue between beyond your main event. Taking advantage of external tools can make all the difference between a static standalone webinar and having a completely engaged audience for not only one event, but for future events and other content too. So now, before we jump into answering more of your burning questions, if you were logged into the webinar a little early today, you were able to experience our waiting room. This slide should be familiar to you. Before you leave the webinar today, be sure to download the slides and search for 3 digital eggs scattered throughout the deck. Click on them to break them open and follow the steps to be entered into a draw. So with that, Danny, let's kick off our second AMA.
Perfect. So we've had, Hayleigh, you were talking about gating content in there, and we have internal discussions often at AZO Network about whether or not we should be gating, particularly on-demand webinars. What do you guys think about that?
Ooh, it's a good question. We gate almost everything that we do for a certain amount of time. And that is for lead generation, but, and maybe Andy, you might be better to talk about this, but it's important. Well, I think it's just an important thing to do, but it depends on the type of content too. So what have you, Sarah touched on this a lot actually, about the value of the content and what you think the value is, and is it worth gating beyond, and how long? Yep.
No, exactly. It's that there's, again, not a right or wrong answer when it comes to gating, and it has to actually include the more comprehensive view of what type of content are you producing as a company, and what do you gate. So I think the bigger question is, like, gate everything. I think that's one where we can easily move towards like a probably not. Because not everything you produce as content deserves people's contact information in exchange for access. But then there's a sliding scale of like, what type of really valuable content do we maybe ungate? So as Hayleigh said, our at least service strategy, like how we typically handle client work, is that the webinar is exclusive, requires registration. There's a 6-month period, I say is most common, where it's gated and still requires registration and then login. And this is so that we can collect more leads during that on-demand period, and more market intelligence, right? how long are they watching, what handouts are they clicking, what CTAs are they clicking, etc. So poll responses, all that great stuff. That's, I'd say, understandable or acceptable in our industry for access to a webinar that's 60 minutes. But then also at the 6-month mark, you're hitting that point where you're like, I probably have something newer in this subject area that's being published. That's what I move to gaining. And opening up this as a free resource now means the opportunity to almost reapproach the media, A to Z, and say, what can we do with this to almost like reheat the pizza? You know, like we've got a whole 60-minute webinar that you could slice and dice into sections. We've got, we can make it available on a video channel, Vimeo, YouTube, whatever your platform of choice is. And now you're getting, after that original 6-month gating, a whole other marketing campaign, if you will. But it is enabled by actually ungating the content. So that's our standard strategy here. But depending on your objectives as a business and a marketer, perhaps running the live webinar without registration at all makes more sense. Because we know if you don't gate something, you get more eyes on it, assuming you effectively market it, which is the other caveat here. But we don't have time to talk about that.
Yeah, gating or no gating, if you don't market it well, no one's going to see it regardless.
You got it. Yeah.
A good question from Robert to do with microphones. Now, we have an internal tech guy who is a bit of a genius on this. So Robert, just for time saving, what I'll do is I'll reach out to you afterwards and share a podcast we did with him. He'll be able to answer that question in a really succinct way. Daria's asked, since you asked in your poll, how can we convince speakers to participate, in particularly high-profile speakers? And I guess just to add something onto that, how do we, if they're not good quality speakers, if they're the sort of subject experts, but they don't present that well, what can we do to overcome these issues?
In terms of getting speakers to participate, I've had a fair share of this myself in a past life at my old job. It is definitely a time requirement, but I think the best way to make people want to do it is to highlight the benefits and then also highlight that you can streamline the process to make it as time effective as possible. So, letting them know that they can prepare their slides on their own. There doesn't need to be a lot of meetings. The meetings that you have are structured, they're on time, they're scheduled well in advance. All of those things help to convince very busy, especially high profile speakers in their subject area, that it's something that's achievable for them. And also don't ask them if they're, available in 6 weeks. Ask them if they're available in 6 months. Really plan early, give them time to make that decision and put it in their calendar, knowing that they have to do it. They'll make time.
Yep. Another thing to add on that is actually the current state of our markets, right? We're not traveling to conferences, and especially in the life science area, scientists, researchers, they build their own brand and their own success, drive funding, etc., by presenting. So whether you're working with a third, like a partner like Azo Network, InsideScientific on this, or running these webinars independent, I think it's fair for you to say, we'd like to help put you on a global stage. We've ran webinars in the past year that have exceeded 2,000 registrants, over 1,000 people online. I would challenge any presenter in our space to say, when was the last time you presented to a few hundred people in an auditorium about what you do? And that's the key thing, going back to what Sarah said. We earlier, we produce a lot of webinars that are focused on the application areas. So we really are sharing the science of the presenters by means to demonstrate what the products enable. And so when it comes to speaker recruitment, that helps. If you're saying, hey, we want you to come and talk about what you do, not us, it's not a testimonial, just showcase your amazing work. The vendor, the supplier wins either way, right? But that helps, right? Is saying we're going to help expose you, and there's value to the presenters. They jump on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will continue with a few more Q&A, a few more questions. But before, I know we're coming up to an hour now, so I just want to share our exclusive attendee webinar special offer. So If you are looking for support at all with your webinars, then we're going to be running an exclusive offer today, which includes over $2,000 worth of free add-ons for anyone who books a webinar with Azo Network and Inside Scientific. This includes a social media strategy session, a featured spot in one of the relevant newsletters, and a lot more. All you need to do is just to click on the call to action to express your interest, and we'll reach out to you afterwards. That's all you need to do for now. Just click on the button and we'll follow up with you guys later on. We'll head back to the Q&A. I know we said we'd try to give 5 minutes back, but it seems like a really good discussion, so we'll carry on.
We're going to take it.
So Michael's question about how do you suggest dropping a seamless CTA during a webinar? I hope that was slyly done and slickly done. So thank you for that question, Michael. He's also asked if on-demand webinars are available, then is it worthwhile to splice it up into highlights out of these? I feel very strongly that this is a great idea, and we do it all the time. What do you guys think? Hayleigh, maybe I'll come to you.
Yeah.
100%. As simple as that, 100%. Using it for promotional is big, but also taking your don't say big rock content. Oh, I hate it. So cringy. But taking that big piece of content that you created and cutting it up into little pieces helps people to engage it in different ways and makes it a little bit more consumable. Yep. Snacks versus meals, and even using it in different ways. So you can transcribe it, you can put it into an interview, you can put it into a podcast, you can use it for a blog.
Absolutely. Something that we do regularly is produce Q&A reports. So this is just almost basically a transcript of the Q&A session, and then also addresses questions that we didn't have time to get to live. So, it's a great way to have your questions answered, even if, you run out of time like we are today. Maybe we'll produce one for this webinar.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. And on that as well, going back to the question about gating and non-gating, by taking the core content, the 60-minute session, trimming out some highlights, it allows you to, maybe deliver a very succinct 3-minute, how to handle on-demand. Maybe that's one we should do for this one, Danny, right? Like a little, take the video we created. This is what you could do if you plan for it well about on-demand gating with all the engagement tools still active. Maybe that's all someone's looking for. 3 minutes, no registration. We still connected with them. They learned something. Mm-hmm. The webinar's still gated though. So if they want to dive deeper, you've got two purposes here. It's a double-edged sword. We can educate you without registration, and we can also drive you to the larger piece of content, which is gated. So that's another reason to slice and dice and repurpose and package in different sizes, as Hayleigh said, snacks versus meals.
Yeah, one of the other things we do is we chapterize long-form video content as well. So Robert's asked about posting to YouTube. We tend to publish on Vimeo, chapterize in Vimeo, add call to actions at sort of specific points through that. And then it just improves the user experience. They can they can find what they're looking for. Most people don't want to listen to an hour if they just want to find out one particular part about webinars or about social media marketing. So anything you can do to improve the user experience is good advice. John's asked, can you advise on how to prevent registration details going direct to the spam folder?
Yes, a little bit. So we've definitely experienced this before, especially with scientists. They're using their institutional emails. Their institutions have intense servers that filter out all sorts of spam. If this is happening to you, and it's happened to us, advise people to add the email address to the safe senders list, and you can actually put that information on the landing page or the registration form page itself to just warn people, like, if you don't get your email, please add this, address to your safe senders list. And that's something that we definitely advise our clients to do if they're finding that people aren't getting their confirmation emails and their reminder emails. The other thing to do is limit links. Emails with a lot of links tend to go to spam folders. So put only the links that you need and maybe leave out the ones that you don't.
Yeah. And this can be actually quite a complicated journey because if you're using So if I understand the question correct, it's the confirmation emails that'll be automatically triggered, not hitting people, so then they don't know where to go, or they maybe forget to log in. So if they're being sent through your webinar provider, you need to ask them, how are you implementing your mass email? And that's the send that needs to be whitelisted, not you. Like, you know, we deliver them from events at Inside Scientific, but at the end of the day, that's just the address, that's the reply to address. They're actually delivered through our platform, right? So they need to do the legwork to get whitelisted. And a good webinar platform will be doing this already. Then there's workarounds where you can actually circumvent that. You can say, bring registrants into our marketing automation or our email software, send them ourselves, right? Or use platforms like Mailgun, again, to automate mass deliveries. Again, a whole other technical subject, but hopefully you can pick a webinar provider that has that locked down, and that's what also makes them a quality webinar provider to choose, right?
Mm-hmm. Just to add to that too, I guess it helps also to have your custom registration pages or custom confirmation pages too. That way they don't get their confirmation email maybe necessarily right away. They at least have confirmation, okay, my data went somewhere, somebody's got it, and this is how I know.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. Sounds good. Do people ask questions in the on-demand webinars? And if so, it seems like an excellent feature, but how would it actually work in practice?
Yeah. So let's make this the last question. It's a good one. Thanks to everybody for sticking around a little bit long. So yes, they do. It's not high, but we see two things actually, and I would say actually more comments come in, which is really nice. And we had an internal chat about this the other week, right? Sarah Hayleigh, about we were on a few webinars and we've been doing a series with one client and a partner, and it's creating like the same people attending multiple sessions over weeks and weeks, and then on demand and live, they're using the question and answers to send through comments about how fantastic the speakers are, how great the series is. So even if it's so to answer the question, no, the usage is low, but I would say what it can bring as feedback, question, or comment is extremely high, right? If you have presenters a week later receiving kudos about something live, like that can make their day, encourage them to present more. If these are people that work with you, they're maybe a little bit apprehensive to get into the webinar presenting role, like your tech experts, and they're receiving this information. I mean, that's great. But I'd say comparatively, it's 10% of what comes in a live. You know, so if we have 100 questions live, we'll get 10 through the on-demand experience. Yeah. Would you say that's a fair guesstimate?
Yeah,
Sarah?
probably.
Yeah.
And it's not even all right away. It's 10 over months.
Yeah. Sometimes I got an email the other day from one that I did in October.
Right.
Someone's watching this right now. That is cool.
Yep. So definitely, I still think it's worth it. But as I say, it's not, the value doesn't come from quantity. I think it comes from the quality of the interaction so you have to think about the scenario. Someone's watching it on demand and saying, I really need to reach out. Can you imagine if that was a product webinar and you didn't have a way for someone who was super interested to connect with someone and take the conversation to the next step? I think part of it's also providing multiple ways to say you can reach out, you know, through the ask a question box, through a CTA that says book a meeting, through an email link that says, you know, contact us now. Like they all kind of fall into the same bucket for me. So great question.
Yeah, and a really good one to end on. So Sarah, Hayleigh, Andy, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with everyone today. And a big thank you to the audience for joining us from around the world. We were a little bit longer than the hour, but I hope you found today's session useful. There's going to be a survey that pops up once we finish today, so please do share your thoughts and feedback with us. We're running the 4th webinar in our series in April the 28th. That's all about the state of scientific purchasing. You can find details for that in the handout section, along with lots of other resources. And if you want to connect with today's speakers on LinkedIn, please go there and reach out to us directly there. Thank you very much again for your time, and we'll see you all again soon.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining today.